Welcome to the BriteVibe podcast. At BriteVibe, we believe everyone deserves to be happy. But in today's world, everywhere you turn, there is division and negativity. At BriteVibe, we have created a global movement to bring 8 million people together who are inspired to live bright, live bold, and share bright vibes. Alone, it can be hard to change, but together we can change the world. Welcome to the BriteVibe podcast. All right, David Wolfe, welcome to the program today. So happy to have you on.
Yes, so good to be here. Thank you so much.
Yes, I was excited. I've been reading some of your stuff, watching some stuff online. So you're a registered dietitian, but you're much more than that. That's just kind of where you started. That's your base, I guess, if you want to call it your pedigree, is that you're a registered dietitian. But you've really expanded that really into more like food addictions, sugar addictions, like addictions. And I think to some degree we're probably all food addicted or sugar addicted and may not necessarily claim that or even understand that we are. Would that be accurate to say?
I would say, yeah, most people are somewhere on the spectrum. It's really interesting when you look at the like the clinical diagnostic criteria for substance abuse disorder, and you start through the lens of food.
Yeah.
Most people would meet criteria. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think we all have crutches, right, that we use that are dietary crutches, whether it's caffeine or sugar or eating habits or patterns that even if we're not overweight, even if we would consider ourselves healthy, we're still probably doing things that are, I mean, why, and instead of me saying it, why do people, what typically is driving addiction when we're talking about food and sugar?
What's driving it? Yeah. Well, I mean, you have the food environment, right? And the food industry and all that, but then you have the biology. So I think primarily, we're driven. It was really interesting. I heard Jordan Peterson talking about how the dopamine system, which is sort of our reward-oriented system in our brain, is old, but the system that's older is our serotonin system, which is our community-based system. And if you think about food, food's like a reward, but it's also like this like community, foundational, familial, traditional thing. And so I think it's just so primary to who we are as people, our preferences, our emotions, our family, our cultures, our customs. So I think that really drives a lot of the behavior. But then, I mean, really the reward and the salience of what happens when we eat it,
right?
That I think keeps us going for more and more and more until eventually we become addicted and we just can't stop no matter how hard we want to.
And so, yeah. And so not to confuse, like, well, I won't even say confuse, but so basically today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about food addiction, sugar addiction, but not from like, but probably I would like to at least dive into the subject of that. It's probably not something that most of us identify that we are. Right. So if this isn't like those people over there, it's not like those people are food addicted. Those people are sugar addicted. Those people are addicted to caffeine. We're all addicted to something. I mean, I remember watching a documentary about a guy who had like was 600 or 700 pounds. And then he lost like 400 or 500 pounds. He was down to 200 pounds. And then of course, he kept it off for a year and then boom, he ate a bunch of hot dogs and stuff and he ballooned back up. Right. And the basic, I think it was either he or like a psychologist was saying, well, just imagine if you were addicted to alcohol, but you actually had to drink it to live, right? I mean, how hard would that be to
right?
And so there's this, huge thing of, I think we all use food for emotional management, right? To some degree or another. Most people. I know I do. I mean, it's just what food am I choosing to put in my body that is like the warm, lovey, makes me feel good. And I've kind of morphed that from like just, a gallon of ice cream at night, maybe to some frozen blueberries, right? So it's not like I quit the pattern. Right. I just upgraded the intake of what I was doing. But typically, who are you working with, or who do you work with, and kind of how are you addressing those things?
I think people find us, because I think that there's not a lot of people that are willing to address this as straight on as we are willing to address it. So, I mean, we work with addicts. I mean, we work with people who have tried everything else. Right.
And these are typically people that are overweight or just or is there
sometimes, I mean, I was definitely a thin food addict. I think it's not uncommon. I think we're harder to treat, right? Because there's a lot less consequences, or there are a lot less overt consequences. I think if you eat obesity as one of the consequences of food addiction. Yeah, I mean, there are other consequences. I mean, there's plenty of thin diabetics out there and things
Right.
like that, but even emotional and spiritual consequences, feeling broken is a consequence, metabolic consequences, blood sugar management, things like that. So anyone that identifies, I think, with food as a drug and as a way out from the, it's funny. Eric Clapton defines a drug. He was interviewed for 60 Minutes. He defines a drug as anything that would change the way you think or feel. Which is powerful, right?
Pretty much everything.
That's a laundry list.
Right.
So I think for people that identify that food changes the way that they think or feel, and they use it specifically to change the way they feel, those are the people that we end up really helping.
And typically then they're changing the way they feel because I'm assuming don't like the way that they feel. That's why they're trying to change the way they feel. Is that?
Well, I think it's funny. There's like this biopsychosocial spiritual model for addiction.
Okay.
And I think that we need to look at all four. So biologically, we have a different brain. We call it a magical brain, put a positive spin on it. I think we were likely we being addicts, we were likely the people that survived evolution because we were just like ready to get up and go and get stuff done. Like, we're at Antelope, Ralph, let's go. So we're just we're just kind of those jump into things kind of people. So that's biologically driven by our brain, by our reward system. I think socially, we end up interacting with other addicts, whether we mean to or not.
Right.
It definitely, and then it affects socially. Socially, our relationships are very driven in part by the disease of addiction. So whether it's how we manipulate other people to get what we want, or maybe we keep people that have our view of normal in our circle so that we continue to use.
Right.
Psychologically, the brain, the thinking, I think is huge. And spiritually, not just so much about like higher power God, but more like, how do we interact with the universe? Kind of like what you talk about, like, how do you vibe?
Right.
So I think addiction ends up, it lowers our vibration. So
totally.
I think we need to handle all that stuff. So looking at it through that way, instead of just like, I have a problem with food. Well, you have a problem with food because you have a problem, and food is your solution.
Right. Like with any addiction, right? So whether it's drugs, alcohol, sex, social media, whatever you're using to distract yourself, you're distracting yourself obviously from something. And what is that something? And until you address that, then there's not really, I think you can code it, you can soothe it, you can give it a pill, but ultimately it's not going away until you actually do something with that underlying hurt or that underlying emotion, negative emotion.
Right. And then we're also probably born with the genetic material for this thing, and so nature, nurture, who knows, right? But was listening to Dr. Paul Early, he was a past president of the American Society of Addiction Medicine, ASAM, and he was saying that pretty much it's 50% genetics. Which is a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, we had, and I really love his work, Mark Woolen on the show, early on in the show, probably a year and a half or two ago. And he talks about inherited trauma. And the title of his book is It Didn't Start With You. And it's all about inherited family trauma and how it actually, and I've had a couple other guests that come on the show, said the same thing. It actually affects your DNA. So it creates tags on your DNA strain. And so you do you are born with a propensity for certain things based on the genetics, what your grandparents did and what their grandparents did and how what's your family history and how those emotional things, if they're not resolved. In fact, when I was talking to Dr. Woolen, I think he's a doctor, but he talked, basically my aha moment was when he was talking about kids, because he was like, if I've inherited it, guess what? Then if I don't deal with my DNA, if I don't address my own issues, whether they were mine or the 50% that were inherited, guess who gets to experience them? And guess who else gets to deal with them, right? My kids. And so for me, it became it became this real aha moment of this shit's got to stop with me, right? I can't, if I'm going to be a good parent, if I'm going to be a good citizen, if I'm going to be a good, member of my community, then I can't just eat my way or drink my way or right to numbness. Because if I don't deal with it, then and nobody wants to see their kids suffer, right? That's that's not a good
Right.
thing.
I mean, I have a 3-year-old.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like
yeah.
she we were at a petting zoo like 2 months ago, and she went to go pet a sheep, and right was she putting her hand on the sheep's head, a macaw goes, "Wah!" Like really
Right.
loud, and so she's scared of animals right now. I mean,
Right, yeah.
And we were at a barbecue yesterday. It was and
The holiday, yeah.
this cute little corgi just runs up to her and is barking at her and howling,
Oh,
and
no.
she's like not having it. So, and as a parent, I have no control over her reaction to that. Like
Right.
whether that takes her years to process through, or, whether she loves dogs in the next 6 months, you just don't know.
Right.
So, and I think the other interesting thing about addiction is I think a lot of people view addiction as stemming from trauma. I think trauma makes it easier for a person to become addicted, but I don't think it causes addiction. I think addiction is primary. So I think there's a lot of lens points, and a lot of people who have done a lot of interesting work. And you have Gabor Mate out in Vancouver, who does a lot on addiction and trauma and things like that. I just don't think. I think do a lot of addicts have trauma in their life? 100% absolutely. Does increase the propensity or the speed at which fulminant addiction presents itself in someone's life. Yes. I just don't think it causes addiction. I mean, I can look back over my life and I can't isolate any pinpoints for trauma. And I know a lot of people that would say the same thing, that nothing traumatic happened to them, that they can recall anyway.
Right.
So, I mean, but we all experience, I mean, look at birth. I mean, birth is pretty traumatic. So,
Yes.
I don't think it's something that we can escape. I mean, in this world.
Right, exactly. So typically who are the people that the clinic that you work, or not the clinic, but the group that you work with, typically who is somebody that's coming into that group? I mean, kind of what are they noticing, or what are they trying to solve for, or what's their kind of MO?
I think they're sick and tired of failing over and over again based on paradigms that say that if you don't follow this right, there's something wrong with you. Like, which is basically what the diet industry is. Like, I was looking at some data as we were creating an event, and it was in the diet industry, there's 95% failure rate.
Right.
In what industry can you get away with those sorts of results and still be a multi-billion-dollar industry? Like, it's ridiculous. Like, would you go to a dentist that cleaned like 1 out of 20 of your teeth?
Right.
No, right. So it's like, it's a problem. So I think a lot of it's people who are sick and tired of trying everything and constantly failing because they're treating the wrong thing. And they're treating.
Well, go ahead. And they're treating what?
They're treating a willpower problem, but addiction isn't a willpower problem. It's biochemical warfare. It's dopamine. It's serotonin. It's all those things that make us human. And then the other problem, right, is that we need dopamine. Like dopamine is like, it gets us to get stuff done. It's like, why do you pick up a book? Because you're excited to pick it up. It's like this novel. It's new. It gets us going. But when it becomes hijacked, then nothing that's good for you will get you going the way that cocaine will.
Right.
Or sugar will.
Right.
So it hijacks the system. And then I think people are left feeling absolutely broken and miserable because they've been preyed on by the disease of addiction. There's nothing else to blame.
Right.
So I think that they're tired and they want something different. And I think we offer something different, a new perspective.
And so what's different then? I guess, so if we have a 95% failure rate with diet, and I would say probably 95% failure rate with most addictions or trying to break addiction. It's over 50%, I think, for all addictions, at least rebound, right? Type stuff. So what works, I guess? How do we get it to, how do we get success?
I think it gets down to the neuroscience and the retraining of the brain and giving people systems. I think it's all about systems. People need to know, how do I get from A to B? And then what exactly does that look like? What exactly do I need to do to be able to reach that? As opposed to like painting a lofty picture and giving people dreams and fantasies and all these things. Like, no, we had this thing called CARE. It stands for connection, action steps, recovery, protection, and education.
Okay.
So we know that addicts do well with other addicts. Like if you take even when they're struggling,
right.
like even when the addicts around you are struggling, there's that common bond that's formed by connecting. And that's one of the things, like addiction is isolating and alienating, right? So like alone in a crowded room, like that, those kinds of feelings, like in the corner at a high school dance, like you've got no one to talk to. Like that's what the disease of addiction does. And so connecting is the opposite of that. Action steps, because people really need to know what to do. It's nice to tell them like you're reaching for this, but how do you get there? What are actual things that you could do? And then recovery protection, which is our take on relapse prevention. I feel like relapse prevention sounds like, well, something's going to go wrong and it's just going to kill you. And it's just like, it's just has like this sort of negative, but what if there's actually something you could do like every day that would help ensure that you stay in your recovery? That's what it's about. It's not about, oh God, this big thing's coming up. What are we going to do about it? It's how am I going to recover in the 24 hours that I'm in right now, today? And then education, knowledge. I think people have been totally misled and confused about food. Like my mother-in-law's a diabetic nurse. Like she's a nurse who's diabetic.
Right.
The questions she asks me about food are just befuddling. And it's not her fault.
Right.
I mean, doctors are given 3 hours of terrible nutritional education, like during their whole med school, training. And what are the diseases that they're treating in primary care? They're all diseases of food. Right. They're all blood pressure, diabetes, even you could even lump cancer in there, I mean, and so they don't know.
Right.
They don't know. So they give people the same advice over and over again. Which is, well, eat less, move more. Right.
Yes. And I've got a question around the recovery protection. What does that look like exactly? So I understand connecting, right? Connecting is probably being part of a group.
Sure.
I've been part of different groups. It's very, healthy typically. I mean, I've been part of a kind of a business / a life group for a decade or more. And I'm with the same people. I see the same people once a month, and we share about business, we share about life, and so we can get extremely personal because it's highly confidential. And that's been a very good thing for me throughout my life, because at least it gives me a connection point. Whenever I'm in that group, there's this sense of acceptance. Action steps, I can kind of relate to and say, okay, that's probably coming out of, that's something that you guys help line out and say, okay, here's the things you need to do, to your point, to get from, these are tactical things you have to do with addiction.
Right, exactly.
But I don't know that I understand what recovery protection is.
So recovery protection is essentially like, I could ask you this question, like, I know my recovery is in trouble when ...
Okay.
So then you would be personal to you. You're not going to have my cues.
It could be a family. I know I'm going to have a family reunion, or I know I'm going to.
Right. It could be a family reunion.
I know I have to have a talk with my boss. I know that I've got to have
exactly.
So it's something that I'm
mind, right?
It's something that I'm worried about in the future. Is that?
Yeah, or something that's happened in the past that could trip you up again.
Got it.
Sure.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So it could be a smell. It could be a person. It could be a place.
Okay.
It could be a taste. It could be a sound.
But it's something that triggers the addiction.
Yeah, like for instance, like I'm actually, believe it or not, a trained artisan bread baker. I haven't baked in over 5 years, but so my wife's in the kitchen, like eating a toasted bagel. I'm like, oh, I'm in it, like I'm there. So like that's a cue for me. I never would have thought of that until I'm in it. Right. So I learned from it. Right. So cues, and then we have a custom. So you have a cue. Maybe your cue is that you're really worried about this meeting with your upcoming meeting with your boss. Maybe it's a review. And so your custom is that you use something to change the way you think or feel. Maybe it's, you go get a 6 munchkins and a caffeinated coffee with cream and sugar. That's your custom. And then you have a consequence. What is your consequence based on the custom? And then, so usually, it's, it would be a negative consequence most likely, and then, and then you take the cue, and what if you change your custom? And
so you're changing your, and
then you change your consequence.
And so give me a real world example of that so that I can quantify that, I guess. So what's an actual thing, and then how did you remap that or language that or restory that?
Yeah.
For somebody.
So I hear my wife chomping on something.
Right.
I go in there and I eat it. My consequences, my stomach hurts. I'm foggy.
Yep.
I feel bad about myself. I have guilt and shame. I have regret. I don't want to tell anybody about it in my community because I know I am misstepped.
Right.
And then a new custom would be I get the sound, I get the thought, I phone someone who I know understands recovery.
Right.
And then I feel connection. I don't feel alone. I don't feel worried. That's like a really simple example.
And that's the protection piece is right, that I'm prescribing, I'm finding out things that I can prescribe myself or whatever that will take me out of my normal pattern. Is that?
Yeah. So we have the 3 C's, which is the cue, the custom, the consequence. And then we have the 3 P's, which is the plan, prepare, and protect.
Got it.
So I think what you do is you use the 3 P's really inside that custom.
Got it.
So that you're almost ensuring yourself that you can, it's not perfect, but you can nearly ensure that if you follow through with the plan that was written for you and you protect based on you, that you get the consequence that you're after, which is usually the opposite of the consequence of using.
Right. Okay, and I'll just leave that there. I think I understand what you're. I'm starting to understand.
I think the main thing is the spin on it that people are putting in the work and they're getting the results, not for something that's in the future that they're like, oh, my recovery is going to terminate in 6 months or 9 months or 5 years.
Okay,
it's that when you put in reps, like just going to the gym and it becomes easier for you to lift that bar off the bench.
Right.
Because you've done it before. So that when your pants are on fire,
right,
or when the alarms are going off in your head, you've put in the reps. Right. By protecting your recovery all this time that you know what to do.
And you know the outcome.
You're able to actually do it. So you have in the clinical, what we call self-efficacy, which is the belief that you'd be able to actually do something.
Right.
So in the beginning of your recovery, you're not going to have that level of confidence.
Right.
So you might need to put in more reps. But as you progress through, a threat isn't as threatening,
right?
Because you've put in the practice, you've put in, and I think that's what the protection piece is. It's instead of just being like, oh God, here's the steps I'll take if I relapse, or oh my God, I'm going to relapse if this ever happens to me,
right?
And no, it's not necessarily true. You may not have to use when your mom dies.
Right.
You might have an ulterior way, and we can do that by protecting your recovery, by putting up in our forefront, making it super important. So it's valuable to keep it going, as opposed to using fear of relapse as a way of trying to keep someone clean. And then it's like the carrot and the stick.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And are you using, like NLP or something, are you using something to program that and making that the consequence? Because like when you talked about your stomach hurting and some stuff like that doesn't sound that painful to me, even though I can relate.
Right.
But how do you tie in that because to change a pattern, you've got to have some strong yin and yang, right? You got to have some carrot and stick. I've got to have something that I'm
sure
see that's truly negative, but I also have to be able to anchor in something that the benefit of the good behavior too, right? So is there a system you guys are using for that?
So like for instance, we use something called memory of the pain, which is sort of negative consequence driven. So that's we use memory of the pain and we pin that against fantasy of moderation. So the addict's fantasy is that they can moderate, that they can just have a couple and be okay, right? I can just have a shot on the weekends, right?
Right.
No.
Right.
No. And the memory of the pain is what fights against that. Right. So memory of the pain it's visceral, and sometimes you use potential future pain, or one of the things that's really helpful is you talked about community a bit, like collateral damage. Like how does this affect the other people in my life? Like what's going to happen when my kids have to inject my insulin in me, or when I can't wipe myself, or when I can't tie my shoes, or when I have to get air vac off a cruise ship, or whatever it is. So future pain can be used if it's not sufficient. So like I'm what you call a very high bottom. What that means is that like I came into recovery and my life really wasn't that bad. I mean, it wasn't really going that well, but it was very high bottom. So, and then there are people that are very, very low bottom, which means that they've gone through a lot more consequences than I have. So I think they're both reasonable. It's kind of like, well, are you willing to stop digging? Like, are you done?
Right.
And it doesn't really matter how far you've gone to be done if you're done. But I think that, and I see your point about kind of this like healthy fear. And I think that healthy fear is okay. I don't see people flocking towards like fear, at least in today's sort of, I don't know, paradigm, for lack of a better word. I don't think they find it as beneficial as they did, thousands of years ago. But I think there is part of that we're all, I mean, most of the fears that people are in recovery are is that they'll relapse, that they'll lose everything. That's true. And sometimes that's the thing that keeps people going. I always hope there's more than that, but like we say, a day clean is a day one. It's not always pretty.
Right. And still, you're really just, you're talking about specifically food addiction when we're having this conversation. I mean, I know it applies to the other channels or avenues.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, work, it's interesting because we work primarily with sugar addicts. I mean, you're not going to want to be with us if you're not addicted to sugar, but we address.
Now, why sugar specifically then?
Okay, so we say sugar because food is confusing, I think, to people, because people think like of being addicted to broccoli and boiled cod, as my mentor would say. Like, no one really, generally speaking, abuses boiled cod. I'm sure someone does, but it's the point.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But sugar.
Damn it, I'm healthy. I am so healthy. Right? Damn it, that cod is just driving me to be so freaking healthy.
I know, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So no wonder there's a short supply on the East Coast. I think I think that it's important that we explain that we mean foods to change your state.
Got it.
So that might be sugar for you. It might be grains for you. It could be seed oils for you. Usually it's some sort of combination of all.
Got it. Okay.
Like most processed foods will change, your
chemistry,
even in short term, long term, right? Biochemistry,
right? Yeah. And probably through insulin spikes.
That's
is
why
that what
we say sugar?
Because we're getting an insulin spike.
I think when you look at it, insulin and dopamine probably in blood sugar are probably following a pretty similar.
Got it.
Pathway. I mean, they're probably not direct, like they're not 1-for-1 ratio wise, but yes, insulin is a major problem. And why aren't doctors checking it?
Right.
If they know that every metabolic illness is correlates with an elevated insulin level, does that make any sense? No, but I
think it's such a widespread misinformation and problem, both, right? I mean, if you look around us, you walk into any convenience store, you walk into any. If I asked my doctor to check
my insulin, what he would laugh. He'd be like, "Why?"
But yeah, I think there's just so much. I wouldn't even say misinformation. I just think I think we just ignorance. I mean, I think there's just so much ignorance, not necessarily anyone's fault, other than we created this machine, and this machine was meant to, or I don't know what the machine was meant. We created this machine as a society, as a species, and now we have this machine, and we're starting to understand what we built. And now we're like, wait a second, we built something that's actually, we thought maybe in the beginning we thought this was a good thing because it cured hunger or solved for hunger, and in essence we're actually killing people even faster because we're getting them addicted to things that cause inflammation in the body, that cause issues with neurotoxicity in our heads, right? I mean, sugar's a neurotoxin, from everything I understand from my neurologist friends, that it's actually, when we're taking in sugar, we're actually poisoning our own brains, and hurting the synapses, and we don't have clear thought. And when you look at Alzheimer's, I'm in the senior care space as well, and when you look at Alzheimer's, a lot of it has to do with these very same things. In fact, I was on a call last week with a lady, and we're talking about doing a joint venture. She was on the podcast, Dr. Heather Sanderson. And a lot of Alzheimer's is tied to this exact same thing, inflammation in the body, right? And specifically in the brain, right?
Yeah.
And so these addictions to sugar, and when you say sugar, we're not talking about just the white powdery stuff that comes out of the bag at the store, right? We're talking about things that create sugar, high blood sugar in the body, right? So
right, exactly.
To your point,
Sugar's
processed
the end
foods.
result.
Yeah, sugar is the end result.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not that, I mean, if I'm eating a cheeseburger, that might not seem bad, but the bun that's on that cheeseburger, right, is turning straight into sugar in my system, or insulin.
Right, it's in your system, right? Exactly, or the seed oil that they're using in the sauce, or they all cause inflammation. I think you're right about. I worked in a nursing home for 2 years, and as a dietitian, which is the complete opposite of what I do now.
Right,
they literally use sugar to dope up their patients and keep them doped out.
Oh my gosh!
Like I wouldn't say that they deliberately do that,
right? But
I can see it.
Yeah,
they're like, well, he's acting up. Let's get him an ice cream cone.
Right.
So.
Because they think that
they do
helping with his blood sugars.
Right. And so to me, they're exacerbating the problem.
Right.
As opposed to, addressing it.
Right. And so then
it's a paradigm.
And so people coming and that you work with that are your clients are typically sugar addicted. Is kind of how you're defining
yes.
that.
And the way I would look at it is we have something we believe in called addiction interaction disorder.
Okay.
And so what that means is one disease, many outlets. So you'll hear a lot of alcoholics or drug addicts come into our space and they'll be like, I was addicted to drugs and I became addicted to sugar. Mm-hmm. And we say that's not likely. It's likely that you were addicted to sugar, you became addicted to drugs, stopped using sugar, and then put down the drugs and returned to your primary addiction, which was likely food, because the age of onset
was probably
formula-fed babies at like 3 or 4 weeks.
Wow.
Other kids who are breastfed, maybe. I mean, look at a cake smashing at the first birthday.
Right.
Usually that's not the first introduction of sugar either. So it's just mainstream in our food supply. So I think we have to look at that. And if you look at the culture around alcohol and drug treatment, it's become one of I've done outreach at treatment centers and things like that. And you're in a room and there's 4 vending. You're trying to keep these people's attention and on recovery, and there's 4 vending machines behind them, and it's filled with chips and candy and soda and all that. So it's like,
welcome to the school system.
There are even some references in the initial 12-step recovery movement that elicited to basically say, well, like, if you have a craving for alcohol, have sugar. So not so helpful now, especially my clientele. But I think that so we look at it like I could get an effect from a milieu of things, and they would, like, I could get a rush from gambling. I could get it from sex. I could get it from a Twinkie. I could get it from some alcohol. I mean, I could get it from getting involved in an unhealthy relationship with someone. I could get it by being a compulsive helper. So those are all the outlets. So, but we need to view it like we're treating one disease. Because once you put the sugar down, guess what? Another thing's going to pop up. Right. That's the reality. So the most of the work that we actually do isn't about the food. Right. And you hear us when we run events, it's just not about the food. And people are like, what are you talking about? That's why I'm here. Right. And it's not. The food, like I was saying before, the food is the solution. Right. It's not the problem. It's just the solution stopped working.
And so then do you have systems or the part of the program that really deals then with the underlying dis-ease in the system?
This is that's the program, right? The program is that. Yeah, so I think that's a good way of putting it. It's funny in our Recovery Accelerator program. I don't think we talk about food once.
Oh, is that right?
Because they have the baseline community access in the group, so they're getting, the real talk about it in it, and through the we run challenges to kind of bring people in and to find the right people. Because it's funny because we shoot hard on day 1, and you see a drop off on day 2. People are like, I'm not ready. and we do it on purpose.
Right.
We don't want the wrong people in there. We want our people. So, but yeah, so we use things like acceptance, as a tool. We use things like, creating rituals as opposed to like routines or checklists, getting people so that they're actually deriving meaning out of the hard things that they're doing on a daily basis. Like if your morning routine doesn't feed your soul, what are you doing?
Right.
It should be so meaningful that you actually want to do it.
Right.
So I think teaching people these things, we call them risky situations, which is like what we were talking about when we talked about the cues. A risky situation is like, well, I'm going to my in-laws and God, they have junk on the counters everywhere. Like that's a risky situation. And then we teach people how to identify their own warning signs, which is along the lines of, I know my recovery is in trouble when, so that then they can have an individualized action plan based on their specific trigger. So a lot of these things all end up tying together to get people to where they want to be, which is, well, like living the life that they want to live. And yeah, the food got them to do the work, but it's not the real work. The real work it's like Brendan Burchard said, it's the work that makes the work work. It's like, it's the real, and it's not about, I can't have sugar anymore.
Right.
It's about, I have to totally change the way I live and my mindset, and I have to learn to tolerate things that I wasn't ever going to thought that I would be able to tolerate. Its life.
Right.
I think it's just through the lens of recovery.
Got it. And I'd almost look, I mean, as you're saying that, it's for me, it's like emotional intelligence, or the ability to deal with the what is and in the now versus compartmentalizing it and pushing it down, and then it manifests. I mean, a lot of times we have, I think every guest we have on has just an amazing story and doing amazing work in the world. And the one common kind of theme that strings through that is, you got to do the work. There's no way around it. There's, you got to do the work.
Right.
It's emotional work. It's spiritual work, whatever it's soft work, right? It's not the checking the boxes. It's the looking inside and seeing what you're afraid of, right? It's looking in the shadows of your soul and saying, okay, I'm really afraid of that, and I don't have the emotional tools to deal with it. So either I'm going to go get the emotional tools to deal with it, or I'm always going to not be dealing with it, which is out still dealing with it, right? Which is the addictions.
Right.
And
Choose your hard.
Right. Exactly. And it's like, do you want to, I spent several months in India off and on, and part of what they would talk about over there, the gurus and the sages and all that fun stuff that they call them, was, what do you do if a tiger's chasing you? And it was kind of like, it's not, and so your first probably instinct is like run like hell, right? Or lay down on the ground, or it's like let the tiger eat you, right? So you got to like deal with the fear that's there and experience it fully. Let it consume you in a safe in a safe space that's I would say with somebody who can guide you through that. But until you can truly see what the fear is and experience it, it's always going to be chasing, and you're always going to be running to some degree, which is
there's no stability.
Yeah, which is the code, and then we're in the running. Is the addictions come from the, not wanting to address things, which we all have to address, right? That's part of the human experience. If we didn't have those things, it wouldn't be the human experience. We might as well not be here.
Right. Yeah, we say it's like a crack in the boat. The water's going to find its way in. You know what I mean? It's not and that's why I say it's not about sugar. Or food, or sex, or whatever. I mean, like your body, your mind will manufacture. I have a friend, Billy, and when he was a drug addict, and when he's in Vietnam, he smoked ping pong balls. I mean, like he melted them down into a pipe to change the way that he felt. Right. So, whatever it takes so that we can
not
escape
the
tiger for a second.
Right.
Yeah. But it's still waiting there.
Right.
Hungry.
Hungry, yes. And so it sounds like a big part of your program, and the analogy I just made, is allowing people to actually experience their tiger, experience their fears, but in a setting that's safe and setting that's supportive.
Absolutely. And people, It's like one of those things where people would be in a circle or wherever. I mean, I guess on Zoom it's not, it's more of a square, but
Right.
the point is that there are things that they would never say.
Right.
Never ever say out loud.
Right.
But they'll hear someone else say it.
Right.
And they'll like be smiling and nodding, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah." And you can tell, you see that they're like they
Awareness.
change in front of you, even on the screen, right? But I think we don't even do one-on-one work.
Really?
Like we don't.
Yep.
Yeah, we do one-on-one calls to kind of get a sense of where people are at, so that we can say, you know, this is an option for you, or this is a terrible option for you. Why don't you try this?
Right.
And we do these sugar evaluations, which take people through the diagnostic criteria for sugar addiction,
Right.
through the diagnostic statistical manual. Like, so sugar addiction, food addiction isn't actually in the DSM. Like, it's not a psychological illness according to the people that write the DSM. So, which is a problem.
Right.
And we're working on that. And the Food Addiction Institute is an organization, a nonprofit that's really working to get more awareness and get this into a place where it can be treatable.
Right.
And then same thing with the ICD-10, which is the International Coding System. It doesn't exist.
Yep.
So we've used drug and alcohol related criteria, but we flip it a little bit. So we do that one-on-one. We'll take someone through a process, and it basically maps out the symptoms that they've acquired over the course of their life on a line.
Right.
And so it shows you like, oh my God, why did I get 5 symptoms when I was 6? Oh yeah, my parents got a divorce.
Interesting.
Oh, what happened when I was 18? Oh, I got a license. You know, so, and then, I moved 3 times, and then the disease progresses. But then you also see these flat lines on the map where people aren't picking up any symptoms for like up to 20, 25, 30 years. And I'm like, what's going on? Well, I was yo-yo dieting. I picked up cigarettes. I was gambling. And so you start seeing the other seats that you see that you're rearranging deck chairs on a Titanic.
Right.
You know, you're switching outlets. So that's the thing, but you can see it on the map.
Interesting.
Because you're like, wow, I was introduced to alcohol, and then I was really bad for the next 5 years. And then they put down the alcohol, and then they pick up something else. Could be a behavior. Right. So that's addiction. It's not the substance, it's the disease.
Right. Well, very cool. So how do people learn more about this and the work you're doing? Where do they go? How do they stay in touch, or at least explore it? Because you mentioned a recovery accelerator that you guys have. And so what would be the
so websites? I think the best thing to do is if you go to sugarxglobal.com, you have the opportunity to download our checklist, which I think is a really powerful. What we basically did is we took everything we thought you needed and we just put it in an ebook. Okay. And there's some really good action steps that you can start doing right now to kind of start quieting your beast a little bit. Got it. And it will give you the opportunity to speak with one of us, myself, Anna, or Judy.
Oh, nice.
And then we run these 5-day challenges as well. We have one coming up this summer, so kind of be on the lookout for that as well. I think that gives you the opportunity to kind of get our flavor, because we're not everyone's cup of tea. Right. We know that. Right. You know, so I'm sure there are people that can't stand me.
No, that can't be true. So it's sugarxglobal.com, and we'll put it in the show notes as well. But
super, thanks.
But that's where you go to learn more about what you're doing and all things food, but really sugar recovery, which I think honestly all of us need some form of sugar recovery or sugar detox. I know there's times in my life where I detox completely off sugar, and I always feel better, and then somehow I always slide back into it. Just
what's with that?
Yeah, and it's not exactly, and it's not that it's if you start becoming aware of what is sugar and how it's getting in, it's everywhere. It's like everywhere. It's like everywhere. It's like any little thing you're like, oh no, this doesn't, and then you're like, holy shit, that's got sugar. Why even put it in? Why put sugar in ketchup? Because I have sugar-free ketchup.
Seasoning.
Seasoning. Yeah. It's like, or there's things that
lemon pepper
has sugar in it. Yeah, it's like, why did they just have a surplus that day?
Salt.
Has sugar. No, I haven't seen that one yet.
Yeah, I think has either dextrose or maltodextrin in it.
Wow. That's crazy.
I think it's dextrose. Table salt.
Table salt?
Yeah.
Wow. So they slide it and when I say I shouldn't say they.
They're sneaky.
It's in everything. Once you start looking, it's in everything, and that makes it even harder. But I think that the nice thing is, in today's world, there are more and more choices, more now than ever. I remember, 15, 20 years ago when I started kind of getting into the health and really diet and what am I eating and what am I consuming. Back then you go to a restaurant or the grocery store and there was not a lot of choices, right? And now there's tons of choice. I mean, there's just tons
maybe
of
too many.
Right. There's tons of choices out there of we at my house we have chocolate that's sweetened with stevia instead of sugar, right? And that way we don't get the insulin spikes. And same thing when we're cooking, we don't we use stuff that's not specifically got sugar in it, but still tastes good, like bananas. I'll use bananas in a recipe instead of sugar or something like that. So at least we're getting the fiber with it, and we're getting some. And
and there are some people that wouldn't even be able to handle that.
Right. Wow, that's
like
amazing.
Me. Yeah.
Is that right?
Like a banana?
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah. I fruit and it doesn't work.
Really? That triggers it.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, lots of things. Some people are very sensitive around cheeses, different cheeses, milk.
Right. I can see the milk. Yeah.
Coffee, decaf, non-decaf, doesn't matter. Cocoa is interesting. You mentioned cocoa because it has anandamide in it, which crosses the blood-brain barrier. So, get a little something. I don't think I could do chocolate. I mean, even if it was like 95%, I would still I would find a way. I would find a way.
Oh my goodness, that's interesting. Well, yeah, we need to dive deeper into that on our next conversation. Well, thanks so much. We'll put the stuff in the show notes. Also, thank you. I know you're going to be a speaker at our Happiness Summit coming up here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Here soon. And if you're listening to the podcast after that, then certainly go out and see other things we're doing. We'll have future summits and talks coming up in our platform. So we'd love you to be a part of those conversations, those live conversations we're having around this, because ultimately, I think, for people who want to improve their lives, that you need to be in community with other people who want to improve their lives, right? I mean,
it's
your point about kind of addiction, where I think you get to the point where you realize that, there's a growing community out there of people who want to live a better, more vibrant, more healthy life. And once you start getting around those people, it is contagious, and you do want those things, and you see the benefits. Like, I love having people on the podcast because it's like I get to see the benefits of people's work that has happened over 20 or 30 years or 5 or whatever the number is. But I'm like, wow, that's super cool to see the results, not just, the testimonials coming from the people who are researching and they're their own guinea pigs. I love that because, it's like, okay, they know it worked because they're actually doing it, not something they're just selling.
Right. I mean, we tell people this isn't hoopla. We're basing everything we do on neuroscience. It's not like, I'm not asking your practices because it sounds like a good idea.
Right.
There's a reason behind everything. And the other thing we say, which is right in line, is connection is the best protection. We really believe that. And when you start telling, we call it red dog, when the disease starts talking to you and giving you all these stupid ideas,
right?
You got to tell on red.
Right.
And you got to tell on someone that understands the ideas, the old Native American. And I think it's driven from Native American story where the grandfather's telling his grandson about the two wolves that live inside him. Yep. And the grandson's like, which one wins? And he says, well, the one you choose to feed.
Right. The one you feed.
So we in Sweden, our mentors from Sweden, there's a red dog, which is the bad wolf, and a blue dog, which is the good wolf. So we tell on red, tell on the red dog. So that's sort of our language for the disease. But you got to find someone who will listen to you when you need to, spill your beans about what's really going on inside your head.
Exactly.
So I think it's so important.
I do too. I agree. Yeah. Well, thank you. It was such an enlightening conversation today. And again, we'd love to have more conversations with you as things progress. So David Wolfe, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you for being a part of the BriteVibe podcast. For more information, go to BriteVibe.com. That's BriteVibe.com. Thank you for listening.